5 minutes, I'll start at that point. So we are live. Darin, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And good morning to everybody out there. Of course, I'm Bryan Armentrout with the Food Safety Foundation. I'm very pleased today to have with us a special guest, Dr. Darin Detwiler. How are you doing today, Darin?
I am doing well. How about you?
Not too bad either. So it's interesting here in Colorado. It's a little drizzly. It's 37 degrees, and there's a major snowstorm on the way, which I believe starts sometime tonight. Where we're living up in Loveland, Fort Collins area, they're anticipating, they're saying probably close to 2 feet of snow.
Well, it's earlier for me because I'm in Los Angeles area, and the forecast is it's dark with chance of less dark as the morning progresses.
As long as there's no mudslides, no forest fires, it's all good.
Earthquake.
Locusts, you name it. Special effects and everything. This is awesome.
Special effects Friday.
So please, everybody, please get in the chat here. Of course, we're on live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And we're talking all things food safety. And with this, one of the things that we do with this, unlike your normal presentations where you watch it and then you wait and have some questions at the end and stuff like this, this is interactive. We want to talk food safety and really have a discussion here. And everybody does an amazing job with this every week. And so definitely, as you have comments and you're seeing things that you'd like to know more about, because Darin's got just an incredible amount of wealth here, pipe up, right? So put it in the comment section. As soon as we see it, we'll roll that into what we're talking about. So we love to go over these things. Now, one of the traditions that we've started here on the Food Safety Chat Show, Darin, Jill, good morning, my friend, is our morning drink. So for everybody who's watching this, please get your favorite beverage. I've got, of course, my trusty coffee. Darin's got his water. He says it's water, but it's 7 in the morning out there, so I'm going to believe him. So enjoy, everybody. A few shows ago, we had a very interesting discussion around caffeine with Danielle from Green Eyed Guide. Interesting how caffeine, it's kind of in this no man's regulatory zone and how those laws develop. Very interesting on that side. So we're going to dive right in here, Darin, because we got an absolute ton of stuff to go over. And we're trying something new here today. We're going to do a screen share, and Darin has some slides, which are awesome. So fingers crossed. Hey.
Hey.
Right. It works. There we go. So morning, Raphael. Good to see you, my friend. So let's dive in, Darin. It's all yours.
Sure. Well, I had an interesting conversation with someone lately who was trying to figure out who I am. Because I have this consulting group, I speak, I write, I have a column, I work with media, I teach as a professor at Northeastern University, and we got into this idea of to use his expression, what's your cheesecake? Right? The idea that the Cheesecake Factory, they're known for their cheesecake, even though they have all these other things. This whole notion of what's that one thing that you're kind of known for? And I said, well, even though I have all these different hats, and there's even other hats, I don't need to bring in this conversation. But if you were to boil it down to the one kind of thread is communication. I communicate different things to different audiences, obviously. But in terms of this capacity, this idea of how do we support the bigger true burden of disease, the bigger advocacy side, understanding the story behind the data, behind the numbers, behind the policy, and that kind of a thing. So communication has been something that has been part of my life for about 28 years with this look at food safety, and I think that it's something that would be interesting to talk about. And because I am a professor and I've been a high school and middle school teacher as well, I thought I would do kind of a very brief media and communicating food safety 101 for us this morning.
Awesome. Perfect topic. Man, we were talking about this offline a little bit, right? It's all these different bubbles of communication that we have out there now, because in the past, our ability to get information was really limited. And now it comes from everywhere, which is both good and bad. So.
Sure. Well, And if we look back at, let me see, what am I doing? I have to go, there we go.
Yeah, right.
If we look at early media, you looked at your political cartoons that were in the newspaper of the day, and because there was, the newspapers were the big way that that ideas were communicated, and you had not only people who couldn't read, or they could read but not read English. These kind of political cartoons. Here you see two examples. The idea of looking at the beef trust and all the things that we are worried about with beef. And this is from 1906. As you can imagine, both of these are from 1906. On the right, the idea of Packingtown, and look at the kind of ghostly, devilish look of this almost like the mayor of Packingtown, and worried about how pure our meat products are. What goes into, it's hard to see, but on the pushing before it goes into the tube, the system, if you will, it's debris and dirt and who knows what's in there, and then all of a sudden it comes up beautifully packaged. So there was this concern, looking at how do we know what's going on, kind of a scenario. And obviously this concern came out through a series of articles called The Jungle, and those articles turned into a book by Upton Sinclair in 1906. But what I want to focus on here is the idea of that year, the London Daily Times Literature Review, the literary supplement, talked about this book and talked about how it's less than horror. It's with nothing less than horror that we learn it to be true. The things described by Mr. Sinclair happened yesterday, are happening today, and will happen tomorrow and the next day until some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. It literally talks about this book as being unfit for women and people to be able to read, that it's so disgusting, that how dare someone write this stuff, and that if this is a work of fiction, how dare he? But it's not a work of fiction. That's why this person doing a literature review had to make this statement. And we look at it in terms of the political impact here. This meat scandal, as characterized by this political cartoon, Teddy Roosevelt was shocked by this and put his own team of investigators to investigate Packingtown in Chicago. And literally, if you can look at Library of Congress, there's a series of letters, direct communication between President Roosevelt and Upton Sinclair, trying to describe what was going on and how to see this work. Obviously we have the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, and there were some changes with the FDA in 1938, but we relatively didn't talk about food safety until 1993 with the Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak. And I talk about this a great deal in my book, Food Safety, Past, Present, and Predictions. And it's not just about, again, the history and the dates and places and the economics and the politics, that kind of thing. I talk about it because of the four children, the four toddlers that died, the last one was my son, Riley, who was 16 months old. And, I had been in the Navy just before this. I was a nuclear engineer. And when you're 24 years old and you're a nuclear engineer, you think two things. One is you know a lot, and you've experienced a lot in the Navy, and you're 24, so you're immortal. But learning about E. coli on my son's deathbed was not an experience that I ever wanted any other parent to learn about. And I had made the assumption back then that either science and technology or policy would change this, and we wouldn't have to have these food safety outbreaks. I mean, look at how things changed after 1906. You were talking about it for a long time. But we've had literally now 28 years since 1993, 28 years of this endless cycle of failures in food safety, and most of which we find out after someone's already been harmed.
Yeah.
So we need to look at how this changes in the big thing and how we communicate this.
Yeah. Darin, one of the things on my side, my background is, manufacturing operations and stuff like this. So this is, very personal for me too, because we work very hard to prevent this. And one of the things that I would always watch out for in companies is if they use the phrase, well, I ask them about food safety and how they do things and stuff like this. And if they say, well, we've never had a problem before, that's a company that's going to have a problem, because they think that their past luck is somehow going to translate into future safety, which it never does, right? They end up having something like this.
Well, and if you look at some of these major cases, these major landmark cases, I remember when I was doing work as a stakeholder advisory member person with the USDA and FDA and CDC, for instance, when there was an issue with caramel apples around Christmas time one year, that threw people off. When there was a problem with bottled water, that threw people off. When there was the listeria in ice cream, that threw people off. The romaine lettuce threw people off. The peanuts, even Peanut Corporation of America, Stuart Parnell saying, well, we've never had these problems before. It's like, you just had Peter Pan peanut butter issue within the last 2 years before that outbreak. So it's always interesting when you hear these, we don't have these problems. Chipotle, we've never had these problems before. No, look at Jimmy John's. How many times a year, like every other year, they had an outbreak tied to Sprouts, and they treated every single incident as if it was the first time, that this took place. And so there's never the ability to say, this has never happened to us before, it'll never happen to us going forward. I mean, even with 1993, the idea of this being associated with hamburgers, which not only is very commonplace, but realize that, hamburgers and beef is part of, there was that commercial, beef, it's what's for dinner, and how American, and how, the manly culture, the masculinity, the American masculinity was tied up with beef. And so it was not just like a jolt to the industry, any one company or any one sector of the restaurant industry, but even this idea of, we have to rethink our assumptions that we make as consumers in terms of what is American, what is manly, what is simple or safe, and just food in general. We hadn't, before 1993, it had been a long time since we had really talked about how fragile our food safety system is. And yet food is the one thing that connects everyone. It's a part of our fabric, our coming of age is tied to food. And so it was a big wake-up call.
No, absolutely. Raphael, good morning, by the way. Raphael had a comment for us here. So he's saying that he saw from me a post where I was saying there was a big proportion of bacterial contamination that has no explanation. He heard this week that if cattle was eating greens instead of corn, that it would be healthier, thereby for us as well, and added that corn as fodder is a very good base to develop bacteria in meat. I was not expecting such an idea. How much of truth does this have? I think real question for professional experts. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a I think a lot of the advertising and things like that will kind of push these ideas that what the food eats, right, what our food is eating has an impact on us as well, right? Organic and things like this and that. But that's an interesting question. What do you think, Darin?
Well, we know that there's more to the story, because we also know that geography is having a significant role. If you look at leafy greens right now, the proximity of cattle lots and feeding lots, and is feces getting into the soil, or is it into the water systems, is also an issue. This also brings up an idea or a thought for me. I recently saw, I don't know if anyone else has seen these, there's a new series of Ford commercials for new models of Ford vehicles. And I don't have anything against Ford, but what I thought was interesting was, look at the ideas that they're communicating, how their plants are using solar power, their construction facilities are using solar power, and they're having green roofs where there's grass and whatever on the roof, and how they're being environmentally and carbon emissions and all that kind of stuff, and diversity and the youth of tomorrow and all that kind of stuff and those are great ideas. But, when we look at the idea of vehicle safety, there's no talk about how they're making the vehicles safer.
Mhm.
So the same thing kind of applies, and we're actually going to talk about that in terms of food. We've seen the restaurants that talk about, for instance, um, Chipotle at the time of the outbreaks. Right before that, it was food with integrity.
Mhm.
Right? Back with Jack in the Box, 1993, it was the Monster Burger. It's so scary. That didn't live well very long. That didn't
Yeah.
stand the test of time. So we have to, and you and I were talking, Brian, about marketing and the idea that sometimes there's what consumers want to learn and have validation for,
Mhm.
and then there's what is the biggest trend, or what's sexy to promote, and sometimes those don't align.
Right.
There's
Well,
nothing wrong with environmentalism,
yeah.
but I think that more people want to know about how safe their car is than how environmentally it's produced.
Very good point. I think part of the challenge we have in food safety is that it's just assumed, right? That you go to the store and you buy it and it's always going to be safe, and you can leave it sitting in the hot sun in the back of your seat for 6 hours while you run errands and it's going to be safe. And that trust, is very strong in the US relative to the food supply.
Isn't that wild though? Because Brian, imagine crossing the street with kids.
Mhm.
What do you do?
Yeah,
Little
exactly. You
kids.
are
You hold hands, you look both ways, you go in the crosswalk, you look for the lights, because you got to assume that crossing the street is not safe. And yet, we assume that the food we put in our mouths and on our plates for our family a couple times a day is inherently safe.
absolutely.
We talk about stranger danger. We talk about internet safety. There are a lot of things we talk about where the underlying assumption is we can't assume that it's safe.
Right.
Yet, with food and beverage, it's completely flipped.
Yeah, exactly. You know what's funny though, too, Darin, is that the second we travel out of the country, right, we go on vacation to Mexico or things like that, that vigilance switch goes back on, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, we've had a phrase in America for the longest time, for almost 3 decades that I know of, at least. We have the safest food supply in the world. I hear it over and over again. It's a politician or policymakers go to the first yellow sticky they bring up on any conversation is we have the safest food supply in the world, and that may be true. But the thing is that when we have this assumption that it's a safe, we don't have to think about it. It's kind of like we need to have that asterisk on there that says, but we can always try to be better.
Mhm.
I'm sure every single sports team who just wins a major championship says, hey, we just won the title. Okay, but that alone won't carry us through the next season.
Right.
We have to work at it. We don't think about that in terms of food. Our victories of the past can carry us, but our failures of the past cannot be ignored.
Yeah. Good point. I love that. That's a good one.
So in terms of communicating, there's a lot of, this is just from 1993 coverage. A lot of coverage of at that time, which was new for the media. I come to find out years later, and I'm going to talk about why this caused a problem. But as we look at this, one of the things I talk about in my book is the difference between national papers and state and local paper coverage. So these are covered. This is from the same period of time, talking about Jack in the Box E-Coli outbreak. These
Mhm.
are the bigger the word you see is the more times that this word appeared in the headline of an article in, again, either national papers or state and local papers. And you'll start to see a difference here. If you were to learn in 1993 about E. coli from a national newspaper, you get the Jack in the Box company. It's a meat. It's tainted. Science, the president, bacteria, and that's one picture. But
Yeah.
if you flip that script in terms of looking at the state and local papers, all of a sudden, here you have the word E. coli were used, whereas the national papers never used the word E. coli.
Interesting.
You had a focus on community, on family, on victims, on children, on naming actual victims. And I found another piece in work from 1995 that pointed out that my son's name was the first time in America media that a victim's name was used in a major national newspaper.
Wow.
So this was right after my son died, and there had been this growth. So I'm not saying here that there's a problem with journalists. What I am saying, though, is that we have to look at the fact that a national coverage in 1993 focused on one side of the story,
Hmm.
whereas state and local papers chose to focus on a different side. And if we look at this idea of when you're trying to impact people's behavior, which of these would have hit the emotions, or been a message that was communicated straight to the heart of those who need to change their actions or thinking in terms of making a decision driven, or a data driven decision, or whatever you want to call it, to do something different.
Right.
um,
Well, you know, what's interesting on that slide too, Darin, is that as you were talking, I was kind of going back and forth like a ping pong ball between the two. How very little overlap there is in words. Very little.
yeah, very little. I think Clinton is an overlap, and
I saw parents. Yeah, very
yeah,
few. Very few.
yeah. But you look, again, you look at inspectors, CDC, cattle, carcass. You know, you look at how on the very kind of like at 10, 11 o'clock on the left side, the national paper, you'll see
Uh-huh.
death and boy.
Mm,
Very small.
yeah.
There's a difference between saying there's a death, there was a boy, referring to my son. And on the other side, now you've got his name, you got victim, you've got toddler, daycare, community. There's a lot of words that I think are going to make a big. There's even the word fear came up. Um, a lot more information that I think that the quote unquote average reader would find that they could connect with
No, I agree.
in seeing that.
Interesting.
Um, um, but if we look at journalism, right, we know over the last 4 years, the idea of liberal versus conservative bias in media really can impact the not only the quality and what is covered, but how something is covered or how often something is covered. And it's nothing new. It's just that it
Right.
was one of those things that was very much highlighted over the last 4, 5, 6 years. But there's different focuses with ideology and extra media forces. One thing I learned is that back in 1993 there was this question in terms of who would cover this. Is it the national desk, the business desk, the crime desk, the food desk? And of course they have different focuses, different skills. um, we've also seen over the last 28 years how many newspapers have shifted, because of economics in the world. They're no longer in print, or they're smaller, or they've been consolidated, or if they've just left
Yeah.
the field. And one of the startling things I learned is that whereas there had been a growth after 1993 in journalists, investigative reporters who specialized in food safety, food policy, things of that nature, there are only about 4 or 5 today
Really.
in the United States that's their only job, their only beat. There are extremely few, including award-winning journalists in food that have made significant impacts in food safety and food policy. And one day, the newspaper just says that their priorities have changed, and you have to understand the economics of it, and now they're out of a job,
Yeah.
kind of a scenario. Um, so, while this was a major change in 1993, we can see that it is something that has definitely changed today.
Hmm.
Um, One last piece I want to throw in there is um, this is an article that I wrote in 1994, not even a year after my son's death. And this is from the New York Times. I was actually working with TV producers, big network producers, even went to Hollywood, where I was to learn that there was a lot of interest in turning this into a TV movie, but that their take on it was that there wasn't enough sex and violence to appeal to the modern media, the modern audiences at the time.
Wow.
And they had proposed a series of changes that would make our story, my son's story about his death, more palatable. One was that he wasn't going to die, that he lived through this. And believe me, I wish that I could easily, as they could, rewrite history.
Yeah.
Another one was that I was not in the picture, that it was a single mom story, that that's what audiences would want. And to help it better, that Riley's mom would be so angered that she would go into a restaurant with a gun and shoot it up over the anger of the loss of her child. Or if I was in the picture, that I was at one point in the picture, but I would turn to drugs to deal with the grief. And so this is not only verified by the New York Times that networks had these conversations, but this is how they decided to depict it in this 1994 article that I wrote for them.
Wow. So other than the fact that there was a parent with a child who suffered a huge tragedy, nothing else, right? So it's complete fiction. Wow.
Yeah, because that's not what the audiences would want to watch. And believe me, I don't think anyone wants to learn these stories. But again, this, what do you hear? The CDC estimates that every year 3,000 Americans become, or was it 48 million are sick, 128 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die. That number hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same number. And yet, how does the media spin a story like this? And okay, let's take into other examples. When we had the Bluebell ice cream recall, you had Ted Cruz doing media photo ops with the wonderful people there, and all this kind of, you can't take this from my dead hands, and that kind of stuff. And that's great. I mean, that's great. I mean, I'm sure they're doing a lot of work and trying to rectify this, but it is one version of a story. There were so many stories. I didn't bring it up here in this conversation. There's so many stories about how great it is that that Chipotle was able to economic recovery, and Jack in the Box back then, their economic recovery, how great it was for that. I recently saw a story about Chipotle that's talking about how they're going to change their executive bonuses to focus on environmentalism and diversity. How nice. I'd like to see that it focuses on food safety.
Yeah.
But one of the things in the article was how, and this being said after incredible gains, over the last few quarters. Well, of course, there's been incredible gains over the last few quarters because it had incredible lows for a number of years after their outbreaks started in 2015. So, was this journalist unaware of what happened in 2015 through 2018, and unaware of the stock market value dropping out and dropping again and again, and that it took 15 quarters of trading on the New York Stock Exchange for it to finally come back to its real value? Or are they looking at that last bit and go, look at its the meteoric growth of its value? They must be doing something right. Again, it's that media bias. It's that whose desk is writing this, and who are these journalists that are working on this, is something that we have to be aware of.
Right. And Darin, I think you bring up a very good point here, that something that we constantly fight in industry and manufacturing, all these type of things, is that taking care of these things and making sure we have good food safety and investing in the company, these things, is an expense, right? But as Chipotle clearly demonstrates, right, if you don't do these things, this costs you billions of dollars to your shareholders.
There's a number out there that it's, on average, when you look at different industries, the cost of compliance versus the cost of non-compliance.
Yeah.
The cost of non-compliance is on average about 17 times the cost of compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're saying, I'm struggling to kind of justify $2 million to replace my food facilities floor surfaces because it's impossible to take, to test everywhere and to get adequate testing. Well, it may be impossible to justify $2 million, But imagine how impossible it would be to justify 17 times that amount. And you're doing this when there are liabilities and media, consumer awareness of the fact that you didn't invest into that before it was a problem.
Exactly. The average cost of a recall, just direct costs, $30 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas, how much would have been cost? If it cost 1.2 million to have prevented those, to have identified and decided to not put something into commerce,
Hmm.
not
Well,
not to ship it.
that's an interesting point from a marketing side. I'd like to hear your take on this. Maybe they're just afraid to, put that messaging out there because, hey, here at XYZ company, we're investing more in food safety. I would imagine their fear then, Darin, would be, well, why are you investing in food safety? Weren't you safe before? Right? Type thing.
Well, and think about it. That Ford Motor thing, we're investing into environmentalism and lowering our carbon emission and this kind of stuff. Those are positive messages. If Ford was to come out and say,
Apologies.
if Ford was to come out and say, hey, we want you to know that we're investing a lot more into making our cars safer, it begs the question, well, wait, it wasn't safe?
Exactly.
And no one in marketing wants to have that conversation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We weren't very good before, but we're better now.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing to say.
Today we still have political cartoons, as you see in the top left and right, and we have memes. And I think that it's interesting. People ask, "Oh, you see memes? That must make you sad or angry, Darin." And I think that it's like a pulse check in terms of general awareness. I don't think something would go viral or people would assume it's funny if no one understood what they're talking about. Look at that bottom right one, the E-Coli, and it looks kind of like the Ricola commercial because Ricola sounds like E-Coli. But if someone's looking at that and goes, that makes no sense. Why has he got a humongous piece of romaine lettuce and why does it say E-Coli? If someone's able to put those two together and understand what it means, that must mean that there's a general awareness. And after the loss of my son, that was one of the things that I wanted to grow the most is, look, I didn't have a cure. I'm not going to come up with a cure for E. coli. And if I did, I'd also have to come up with a time machine in order to bring my son back. None of those were going to happen. But if I could make efforts to help make it such that food safety, E. coli, salmonella, listeria, etc., are more commonplace, are household words. People understood them and no longer just took our food system for for granted in terms of it being safe, that we didn't have these words in our vocabulary. Then perhaps that is something that could benefit the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's interesting how those things get into our lexicon, right? All I have to say is pink slime.
Yeah. Pink slime. Geez. And there is that was a media nightmare. And even Oprah is actually, she's in the middle right there. Ironically, Oprah was sued in terms of, wait, where's the First Amendment right and calling it what it is and things of this nature. I actually know people who were deposed and part of this lawsuit, looking at how dare you bring up that our food is not safe. And people, back in 1993, 1994, 1995, there were people trying to stop me from talking about this. There was a wrongful death lawsuit, and I would be a much wealthier person if I agreed to it, that I would never talk about food safety again.
Wow.
But I refused to, and thus I have a job today, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool.
But the idea of let's silence this and back then people in the industry were complaining that I was talking. I was on a USDA radio PSA, a series of PSAs. I was doing television work. I was referred to as the crying mom who wears pants, and the dirty Harry of the meat industry. Because people didn't understand this idea of here's a person who's bringing emotional elements into a discussion about food safety. And I'm like, yeah, we would be very emotional if we're seeing the other side of this, and we become harmed, we become victims, and our family becomes victims of this. And I think that if you look at the idea of the greatest way to change the behavior of your workforce, if you're talking about frontline workers, whether it's at a fast food restaurant or a food manufacturing plant, is to be able to make sure that they understand that true burden of disease, and they understand their role in it, and they understand how important of it, how the paramount nature of food safety every minute of every day. And if they can't find an emotional base for this decision to take these actions, then what is it? It's the carrot and the stick. If you don't get them to buy into it because of emotions, then you're either punishing them or rewarding them somehow. That's very external,
Right. Well,
and that's not going to be sustainable.
no, and well, this loops back exactly to those two word bubbles you had earlier, right? Where one is talking very abstractly and one is personal, right? It needs to be personal. One of the things, Darin, I used to do when I would do food safety training in my manufacturing facilities is I would talk with the workers, and we'd have food out and things like this, and say, you trust this food on this table. You don't know where it came from, but you trust it. The food that we're making in this plant, if you can't take it off the line and take it home and feed it to your family, don't make it.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, tell me.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember doing a training like that in San Francisco area, and an employee was saying that he felt guilty over saying that the reason why he thinks food safety is important is because he doesn't want to get sick himself. And it's
Mhm.
like, but it's not like sports where you're either a fan or you're an athlete. Even if you work in the food industry at any level, from the bottom of the totem pole to the top of the totem pole, you're still a consumer. We still have families at home, that we put food on their plates, and it still affects us.
Yeah.
Um, um, with modern media, and your Food Safety Foundation website's a good example of this. There are many ways in which social media is being used today, whether it is support groups, places for information, advocacy groups, even Washington State Department of Health, for instance, trying to directly tweet out to people about a concern. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency communicating. There are so many ways in which social media is being used to support people in the industry and to support consumers. I think we need to look at this in terms of, on the far right, I have a yellow, green, and red there. In education, we talk about this. You can be a passive student where you just show up, you don't say anything, you don't do anything, you walk out of class. You're active, you're engaged, or maybe you're generative, you're writing new research, right? We can look at social media the same way. You have very public, they're just looking, they may follow, and as you keep going down this funnel, you may subscribe, become a prospect, become a card-carrying member, become a loyalist, and an advocate even for an issue. We saw this with politics over the last while. We can still say the same thing in terms of food safety. And whereas some websites and some people are mostly, as you can see, that the bulk is going to be that more passive, just looking, gaining information.
Yeah.
We have evidence how there's a shift. Data mining, data analytics, researchers using Amazon reviews and Yelp data to identify outbreaks and foodborne illnesses that are not reported. Even iwaspoisoned.com was instrumental in identifying the initial Chipotle outbreaks
Mhm.
in Simi Valley, California in 2015. And in these cases, here's where you definitely have people in crowdsourcing. They're contributing. They're being part of this information that's helping us and making this shift where it used to be that the major shift in terms of time after an incident when companies would make changes, most changes would take place when there's changes in legislation or litigation. Today, what we're seeing is, yes, there are still companies that make changes when there's they take action when there's legislation or litigation, but social media has really expanded our stakeholders beyond stock owners. Stakeholders today much more encompasses our consumers and plays a significant role in when companies are going to take significant changes based on an incident or crisis after there has been public attention. And the
Yeah.
sooner we do that, not only do we have more options, but we have less liabilities when we're doing that. And I'm sure that you see that from your perspective as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I dare you to go on Facebook and not find a page for a major food company where they're interacting on an instantaneous standpoint with their consumers.
No, very much so. I mean, it's literally there are jobs created because of this. So they realize I literally you were familiar with TikTok.
Yeah.
I last Sunday popped into a store with my wife because I thought it looked kind of interesting, and I had seen a TikTok video about it the day before and shared it with my wife and said, "Hey, we should go check this out." It had like this back lot of props and signs and stuff from stores, and I went in there, and literally the owner of the store, the 70-year-old guy, was talking to this 22-year-old girl who's the one who made the TikTok video. I'm like, this is crazy. I didn't think I'd see the owner, let alone the person who made this TikTok video, right? And so this woman is again, she's 21, 22. She's trying to explain to a 70-year-old store owner how important social media is, and that it literally brings people in the door and shapes their opinion. And I had to interject and say, it's the only reason why we are here. There were 2 more groups of customers that came in saying, "Hey, we saw you on TikTok." I could see the lights going on for the 70-year-old in terms of, I have to rethink social media, kind of thing, because this is forming people's opinion. This is educating the very people that we're going to depend on for our business, because if we don't have them, we don't have a business.
Yep, it's a double-edged sword, right? It can be extremely positive and promote your business, or man, yeah, in this example here, if you mess up, you're going to find out about it right away.
Yeah. So kind of in conclusion, and I know we probably have some questions and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of steps we can look at in terms of strengthening how we look at social media. Make sure we have clear and complete details, because facts matters, science matters, clarity, and of course, we talk about this a lot recently, transparency can save lives.
Mm.
We need to appeal to multiple story frames, not just the economic side of the story or the ethical side of the story, but even that family and community side of the story. We need to build media partners and followers and subscribers. And we could even use this as an opportunity, which one of the things I've been doing over the last 28 years is to include and even train journalists and social media voices in terms of, you understand what FSMA is and is not. FSMA doesn't have anything to do with beef. Or the USDA doesn't have anything to do with that. We need to be persistent beyond television and print journalism. And we need to be aware of timelines and deadlines for getting stories out. Even with conferences, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I heard about this conference next month. I'm going to see if I can be a speaker there." And I think, oh no. Start looking, right, like if I'm having this conversation today, you need to start looking for 2023, because usually they're already, a year and a half before the conference sending out requests for speaker proposals, and they're trying to solidify their agenda, their conference book, probably at 9 months, if not more likely a year before the event. So don't go thinking you can just hop on the stage next month. You need to understand that timeline. And finally, engaging the public via, multiple platforms. It's not just the web page. It's not just Twitter, even TikTok, like I was mentioning, Facebook and LinkedIn, because there's no guarantee that any one of those platforms is going to work. We have to understand that these all have different, elements, aspects, ways in which people interact, and that if we're going to truly do that, then that's how we're going to address this idea. Like Mr. Sinclair said, some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. These things are going to happen yesterday, today, tomorrow, and the next day, until some Hercules. Well, in this world of DC and Marvel superheroes, there's not a Hercules. Perhaps if we look at Herculean effort, it's an enormous amount of work, strength, and courage that goes behind this. And I believe that how we communicate and how we engage with these communication platforms, they can help us in terms of the work and the strength. But we still have to find that courage in each and every one of us to be able to do this work, and to be able to not only advocate and educate, but to inspire and lead our next generation and our current generation of food safety heroes.
Right. Absolutely. Well said. This is fantastic, Darin. I'm so excited that I was able to get you on and talk about this. And right now, I mean, we're demonstrating through this a new platform that's out there to talk about food safety, right? We're live streaming. This is a few months old, right? So I started this back in October. It's not many people are out there doing these, and being able to talk directly with people and answer their questions in real time around food safety to anybody who wants to see this is huge.
Well, and if you think about it too, there's a lot of concern in terms of, are the people up here, are the executives getting these messages, and are the frontline workers, are the people that are, their first job, they're 17, 18 years old, they're extremely important. They may be the last line of defense,
Yeah.
in their food handling. And if they don't have, if the newest employees, the 17-year-olds, don't understand how important this is and how real this is, and that there's a history behind this, then they're not going to think that it's important in their job. And one of the things that people within industry have brought me in to help them with is the idea of, we never had to teach these people how to wash their hands or tell them that washing their hands is important. And now we struggle to tell people and to keep people focusing on hand washing. Why is that? Well, because we don't think it's important in our own home sometimes, so why would it be important in a workplace? If we make sure that food safety, understanding the true burden of disease, we communicate it better, that this is not just something that is back in 1993 or back with this company or back with this product, that this can happen to anyone and anywhere, that some consumers are more vulnerable than others. We all can become sick, but it's the very young, the very elderly, those who are pregnant or dealing with some underlying immune system compromise that are most likely to be hospitalized and die.
Yeah.
And perhaps the pandemic has really benefited this idea of vulnerability and public health communication and public health activities and actions that we can take to help make sure that other people are safe. Not that I want to try to turn COVID-19 and the pandemic, minimize it or turn it into a positive, but I do hope that if we can say, is there any purpose or anything we can take constructively from it? I do hope that how we behave in terms of public health and how we communicate public health is something that we've been able to focus on over the past year.
Exactly. Well, and part of what I'm doing with the Food Safety Foundation is what you're doing as well, which is breaking down these barriers around food safety and making it clear for companies that they understand that this is not a point of competition for you, right? Kellogg's, Nestle, Keurig Dr. Pepper, whoever, it doesn't matter. If there's a food safety issue, as we saw through this entire talk today, it impacts everybody, right? And that public trust goes down. We need to work together on this. And also, as like Joel's pointing out as well here too, is communicating that information out so the public understands what industry is doing around these activities to make sure that the food is safe. And so, Darin, what you do out there is amazing, and I wanted to thank you again for everything that you do.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope that this provides some kind of an insight that someone's able to build upon and help continue their Herculean efforts to prevent another parent from living with a chair forever empty at their family table.
Yep, absolutely. And our whole topic of conversation and communicating this is exactly what we're doing right now. And if you need some additional information from Darin, you see here on the slide here, we have his contact information. So his website, so herculeaneffort.net, and our herculeaneffort@gmail.com. Best way to get a hold of you?
That's great. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again, Darin. I hope you enjoy your weekend. And I'm going to be shoveling a lot of snow here, so wish me luck.
Excellent. Well, you stay safe, and everyone in their audience, please stay safe as well.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.